Seth Trimble announced he's entering the transfer portal on Tuesday, and folks, this one hurts.
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? It's Wednesday, April 10th, 2024. Welcome into the Locked On Tar Heels podcast, the only daily North Carolina show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Shade, and you've joined us at the place to get your Tar Heels content every single day. Thanks for making us your first listen or watch. Special shout out to all you everydayers out there, as well as all the members of the Locked On Tar Heels Discord community. It's great to be together. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Coming up on the show today, we did get the sad news on Tuesday that Seth Trimble is entering the transfer portal. What will that mean for Carolina's depth and other backcourt decisions that are still to be made? And of course, because we're in the aftermath of the national championship game, all the way too early top 25s are coming out. We'll get to all of that on today's show, but let's start with Seth Trimble, gang. On Tuesday afternoon, Seth Trimble posted a graphic to his Instagram. In part, it said, quote, "I've made the decision to enter the transfer portal as I feel this is the best step forward for me moving forward. Tar Heel family, I will love you for the rest of my life," end quote. So Seth Trimble finishes his sophomore year, and while I think we all saw this as a possibility last offseason, I think there was some shock and surprise that he didn't enter the transfer portal. But because he stayed last season and because his role grew so much this season, I think now there's shock that he's leaving North Carolina. So all of that is very interesting. And so I'm sure some people expected it and others are like, oh my gosh, I'm caught off guard. But I mean, this is tough. This is coming from a guy that was third in the ACC Sixth Man of the Year voting, played a critical role for North Carolina this past season, took massive leaps in his production. Minutes per game went from 9.8 up to 17.1 this year. Points from 1.8 his freshman year up to 5.2 this year. Rebounds, under a rebound a game, 0.8 his freshman year up to 2.1 this year. His three-point field goal percentage went from 16.7 up to 41.9. He didn't take a ton of them, but he was connecting at a high rate this year. Free throw percentage went from 54.8% to 66.7. Still not a great percentage, but it certainly grew by 12 percentage points. You'll take that. So, I mean, it's just, there's so much that Seth Trimble contributes. Obviously, I've just named a bunch of statistical things, but you can't quantify everything that Seth Trimble does by just talking numbers. And so what I want to do is kind of break this up into the personal side of Seth Trimble leaving and then the basketball side of Seth Trimble leaving. And so let's start with that personal side. He, as another part of his Twitter announcement, he said, quote, "I sit with tears of joy, thankful for the blessings and memories this university has given me," end quote. Whoo, ouch. I mean, it just is such a bummer. You hear that and you hear what I said just a little bit ago. And this is coming from a young man who clearly loves this university and these people and these teammates and coaching staff from the other words of his post. This is coming from somebody whose family has been part of the Tar Heel program for a long time now, with JP, his older brother, having played at Carolina. And then now Seth has been at Carolina 2 years. And so it just stinks. And you hate that this is where things are at right now, but that's exactly what it is. This is a painful reminder of the current landscape of college athletics. More often than not now, we will not get to see that full career-long growth. And that's unfortunately true of Seth Trimble. We got to see great growth from freshman to sophomore year. And I don't know about you, but I was looking forward to much more of that ahead of his junior year and then hopefully his senior year. And while it hurts and while we hate it and are disappointed because of that very landscape that we're talking about, I also get it. And I don't blame Seth, and I wish him the very best as he heads off, and hope he lands in a great situation where he can start and get lots of minutes and continue to produce at a high level. This dude is a Tar Heel through and through. You heard that shine through. If you haven't read his post, I encourage you to go do it. And he's all in, even still, even in leaving. He's all in on North Carolina. But if we're being honest, Seth Trimble is just simply doing what's best for Seth Trimble's basketball career. And that's going to find a place where he can play more. And I think that's very telling. And we'll get to that in the next segment of why this is telling. So I think this is just what we have to continue to get used to, right? Like the desire to want what's best for these young men, but the desire to also want them to stay at North Carolina. And the same is true for the female athletes as well. And so that balance is difficult to strike, but we have to come to grips with it because it's going to be the reality, and we just got to get used to it. Now, the basketball side of things, from the personal loss, it hurts. From the basketball side of things, this is a significant loss. Seth Trimble is the best athlete on North Carolina's roster. I don't know if perhaps Ian Jackson or Drake might challenge that coming in, but at least on last year's roster, I would say that definitively. I would say that Seth was the best perimeter defender for North Carolina last year. Just think about his ability to get up into guys and make them just uncomfortable by guarding in that way that you don't want to be guarded, right? Like that's what Seth did. And not only that, him getting out on the break, him finding his moments to shoot, finding his moments to pour it in from outside. He made those 2 threes in the first half of the Alabama game. His ability to get to the rim, I loved this year. As we had some struggles here and there earlier in the year with deciding how and when to finish. And finally, he just went through this great work and great effort to figure that out more capably, of like being more decisive in that. And it got great. But here's the just stark reality of college basketball. While he had grown as a 3-point shooter, you think about a lineup that would include, let's say, for example, if RJ Davis were to leave and Seth Trimble was to move into the starting 2-guard position, whomever you bring, let's say somebody else comes in, an Armando Bacot like big. Let's just say it's Armando Bacot. I know it won't be, but for this analogy, let's just use it. If you've got Elliot Cadeau, Seth Trimble, and Armando Bacot, that's just not enough shooting in your lineup. And so I think as Seth looks at the writing on the wall, it's like, and in conversations with the coaching staff, I should say that as well, right? It's just not there. I think that Seth very clearly loves this institution, but also recognizes that he's got to take care of himself. So from a personal side, I think he would want to stay. But from a basketball side, he's got to get out and go. And to me, as I look at what Carolina will need on the court with someone, assuming Elliot Cadeau's back, with someone like Elliot Cadeau as the starting point guard, your starting 2 and 3 have to be shooters, high volume, high percentage shooters. That's what you need. And Seth is one of those. He shot really well this year, but he's not the volume you need from deep. And I would imagine that as his attempts would go up from deep, the percentage would not stay where it was at this year. So from a basketball side, you lose somebody that unfortunately I don't think would have been in the starting lineup this year. It just is what it is. So it's a bummer, but again, I get it. And I hope you do too. And I hope you'll join me in wishing Seth well. We've just seen the college athletics landscape. Like holding these guys' feet to the fire is not the approach, and it's not the way, and it's not what engenders goodwill towards the University of North Carolina. So please, if you would, support Seth and all the other guys when they make. Same with James Okonkwo, who left North Carolina as well. Now, here's where I want to head next. Does Seth Trimble's entry into the transfer portal perhaps indicate for us anything about other decisions in the backcourt? We'll try to unpack that answer coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball is now in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. You can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Why don't we peek ahead at 2025 national championship odds? Duke unfortunately leads the way at plus 1,100. Kansas next at plus 1,200. UConn at plus 1,300. And then Bama, Carolina, and Houston are all at plus 1,500. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. As you know, we always got to do when we get roster movement in or out. The shady scholarship chart is coming out. So for those of you watching on YouTube, you can see that. For those of you listening, if you want to see the scholarship chart, I tweeted it out on Tuesday afternoon, so you can look at that. But I have updated it to represent Seth Trimble, unfortunately transferring out. And so we're going to get to that scholarship chart in just a second, but I wanted to go ahead and mention it. But here's the part of the conversation that I want to have first. Seth Trimble, I do not believe, would leave if there was not already information he had about the decision of his teammates or the incoming freshmen in Ian Jackson and Drake Powell. Now, I'm not saying anything. I'm not giving you insider information. I am just merely suggesting that given how much Seth Trimble loves this university, which you read in his post, given how ingrained he was as part of the rotation this past year, playing more minutes than Elliot Cadeau, often, like I think in the Alabama game he did, if I'm remembering correctly. Anyway, like we're just right there, challenging for starter level minutes, even though he's coming off the bench. This, to me, very well could be a sign of RJ Davis's intentions. I think we already felt good about Elliot Cadeau's. He's hinted at it and talked about it pretty openly this season that he plans to come back for his sophomore year. So I think that is safe to say, but if he wasn't, perhaps that could have been a role for Seth. His point guard capabilities have grown, but I don't think he was Carolina's lead guard by any stretch of the imagination. And so to me, while you need more shooting than what Elliot and Seth have, perhaps this is an indication for us about what RJ ultimately intends to do. And so if I'm Seth and that is the reality, which again, I'm not saying it is, we're just speculating, but I'm trying to read between the lines, right? I do this a lot, and not that I always get it right, but this is my job and this is why you're here. If Elliot's coming back, if RJ's coming back, and I know that these other two freshman guys are coming in that are going to have minutes essentially at the 2 and the 3, I'm seeing, not perhaps as many minutes as I want, including starters minutes, unless Coach Davis planned, there was always the possibility of Elliot, RJ, and Seth all starting together. But again, that's not enough shooting, in my opinion. Now, the other thing it could mean is even if this doesn't indicate RJ coming back, the coaching staff could have said something like this to Seth. Hey, Seth, RJ's not coming back, and we need a shooter at the 2. And so since RJ's gone, we're gonna dip into the transfer portal and see if we can get a high level bucket maker from outside, a marksman, a sharpshooter that we would plan to start at the 2. I just think that is a kindness that the coaching staff would do to Seth. They're not going to make stuff up that just to satisfy him, because ultimately it would be pulling wool over his eyes. And so I think either of those scenarios are a reality. And I know you would probably, a lot of you listening or watching would push back and say, yeah, but what about Ian or what about Drake? We've just seen this not only at Carolina, but across the college basketball landscape, that you don't want to rely on freshmen to be that level of reliable, particularly at your main shooting position, your main, outside threat position, which is what Carolina needs the 2 and probably the 3, whoever starts at the 3, to beat. Once, Kerwin Walton kind of broke the freshman 3-point curse at Carolina, but outside of that, there's not really been anybody. And so the Tar Heels need a veteran knockdown sharpshooter at that position. And if it's not RJ, I think they got to go find somebody somewhere. And so I think I just imagine that that's part of what's at play here with Seth. And so that's where we're at. So it's funny that literally on yesterday's show, we speculated about what Deja Kelly's entrance into the transfer portal meant for RJ. And literally the next day, today, we're speculating what Seth Trimble's entrance into the transfer portal might mean for RJ Davis. But this is what we do. We try to follow the breadcrumbs and see where they might take us. And when I followed the Seth Trimble transfer portal breadcrumbs, this is where they lead me. So now we turn our attention to the scholarship chart, because with James Okonkwo out and now with Seth Trimble out, there are 9 Tar Heels currently, at least from what we know publicly, still on the roster ahead of next season. I'll name those off: RJ Davis and Jalen Withers, the 2 that might potentially be using a 5th year of COVID eligibility. Harrison Ingram, currently the lone 4th year senior. Jalen Washington, now the lone junior. Elliot Cadeau and Jae'lyn High, the sophomores. And then the incoming trio of James Brown, Ian Jackson, and Drake Powell, the 3 freshmen. And so that's what you got. And when you look at this and start thinking front court versus back court and how much depth do you have and where do you need more and all of that kind of stuff, I think back to Simeon Wilcher's decommitment after Elliot Cadeau decided to reclassify. Part of that was because as Simeon and his family looked at the shape of the backcourt at that point, the minutes available became cluttered, because you now have Elliot and RJ and Seth and Cormac Ryan. The minutes just start to dissipate and Paxson Wojcik and not be as many. And so if I'm Seth and I start looking at that and I see Elliot and Ian Jackson and Drake Powell, maybe RJ Davis, and if not RJ, as I said a minute ago, maybe an experienced transfer sharpshooter. And I just start to think I would have minutes. I would have a key role. But now I still don't think I would be a starter. And now I'm fighting these 2 freshmen for backcourt / wing minutes. And I want something more. And so again, I hear it and I get it. So when you break this down, the current 9 guys that are on the roster as we know it as of, I record this late Tuesday, April 9th. You got 4 in the backcourt after Seth's departure: RJ Davis, who's a super senior; Elliot Cadeau, sophomore; and then 2 freshmen, Ian Jackson and Drake Powell, who would, can kind of float between the 2 and the 3. It's really more like Drake to me plays the 2, Ian the 3. You can float them in this positionless basketball era. So that's 4 backcourt scholarship players. And then in the front court, you got, as of now, again, Harrison Ingram, the Jalen's, Withers, and Washington, Jae'lyn High, and incoming James Brown. So the front court's a little more crowded. But as you look at both of these, the 4 in the backcourt and the 5 in the front court that Carolina currently has, I do still see some holes that need to be filled with talented guys that could very well contend for a starting spot. I still think the backcourt right now, the only knockdown shooter is RJ Davis. I know that Ian Jackson can. I'm not ready to rely on that and assume that he's going to be able to. I want somebody in that mold of Cade Tyson that we've talked about, or others that could do it. And in the front court, just outside of Harrison, who's a bruiser, there's nobody with that requisite height and bruiser ability. So I really want Carolina to go after that type of big. And right now, with 9 scholarships used, you've got 4 available. Now, I don't think that Coach Hubert Davis will utilize all 4 of those, similar to what he did last year, but I would expect him to at least use 2 of those. And if so, I would use 1 in the front court and 1 in the back court. In the back court, get you a knockdown shooter that can start at the three potentially, or at least challenge Ian Jackson for that, right? And then in the front court, I'm looking for somebody that's got some to him, right? That can be an Armando Bacot, James Okonkwo type guy with just some thickness to him that Carolina just doesn't have right now outside of Harrison Ingram again. And then even once you do that, you got two more scholarships, and it just depends on what you think that you've got in Zayden High's development, what you think you've got in James Brown as a freshman. Because I could see Coach Davis using a third of those 4 open scholarships on some more shooting, right? You just can't have enough shooting in this day and age. So that's where things are at. I think Seth saw the writing on the wall. It's potential that he already knew just because the teams talk, right? They know what's going on about what RJ is going to do or what the coaching staff plans to do in the event that RJ's gone. And then that's where I see Carolina continuing to explore what they need to go out and get. So that's what I'm looking at. All right, gang, that's the scholarship situation right now. Again, a bummer that Seth Trimble's out the door, but we look for more shooting. I think that's ultimately what that trade-off is going to be. Now, on Tuesday, because it's the day after the national championship, everyone and their brother started coming out with their way too early top 25s. And as you would imagine in this transfer portal era, where Carolina fell in these is all over the board. We'll talk about why in just a second. Right after I tell you about game time, because now that the tournament is over, it's time for you to go and take in some MLB action. Maybe it's a last minute trip, or you and a group of friends just decide spur of the moment, hey, let's go hit up a baseball game. Well, guess what? Great news, because Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets to the ballpark even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. They've got killer last minute deals, all in prices. I love that. Views from your seat and a lowest price guarantee. And with all of that, Game Time has taken the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. One of my favorite promotions they do is last minute deals. You can save up to 60% off buying last minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And honestly, for me, I worry a lot of times when I buy third-party tickets or from a third-party site that they're going to be bogus. I don't have to worry about that with Game Time ticket coverage, because my purchase, just like yours, is covered by the most flexible customer service plan in the ticketing industry. That peace of mind is something I can get behind. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. As I mentioned, a bunch of the way too early top 25s came out on Tuesday following UConn's back-to-back national championships. Along with that, the AP poll typically puts out their final poll of the year like the day after Selection Sunday, but this year they put out one more following the national tournament. So that was really interesting. Carolina finished 7th. And I kind of don't like them doing this because the poll was pretty reactionary to what happened in the NCAA tournament. Like Alabama pre-tournament had been like in the teens or 20s or something like that and jumped all the way up to like 3rd or 4th just because of their tournament run. And NC State went all the way, they were probably, we're definitely not in the top 25 and finished in the top 10. To me, that's not an accurate representation of what the season actually was. So that's wild. The crazy thing is that for the first time ever, all 3 of Carolina, Duke, and NC State all finished in the top 10 in the AP poll. So I guess that's kind of cool. I read them earlier in the FanDuel read, but FanDuel already has their national championship odds out for next year. And FanDuel has Carolina as one of their top 6 favorites in terms of odds. And so, that's something that's really interesting to look at. But what I really want to hone in on here for a couple minutes as we wrap the show today is looking at where various college basketball sites have North Carolina in their way too early top 25. So I've got the results of 7 different sites today. I counted 8, but I don't have the Athletic because I'm too cheap to pay. No, I just don't pay for it. So I didn't look up the Athletics. And there's a pretty wide range. And I want to give you one or two that are on the top end of that and one or two that are at the back end of that with the reasoning for it. Let's start with the top end, shall we? And the highest ranking that I saw was from CBS Sports, where Gary Parrish does a top 25 and 1 literally every day of the college basketball season. I mean, it's crazy stuff, but I love that he does it. It's so helpful. And then during the offseason, he updates it as there's big news. Gary Parrish, friends, if you're not a Gary Parrish fan, you're about to be, has the Tar Heels number 2 in the nation the day after the national championship game, right behind, I believe he had Houston number 1, because they've already announced they're getting a couple guys back, LJ Cryer and one of their bigs. I forget which one it is, forgive me. But his reasoning, and this is why I'm grateful, because some of these just list it, but some have reasoning for why they do it. His reasoning is based on RJ Davis, Harrison Ingram, Elliot Cadeau, and Seth Trimble all returning. So by the time you listen to or hear this on Wednesday, it will have probably already refreshed again, and it might drop Carolina a little bit because of the Seth Trimble news, but we'll see. But the one I want to go to next is 247 Sports, who has Carolina ranked number 3, and they give more of their logic of why they have Carolina where they do, even more so than Gary Parrish's. And so let me read that one for you. They say at 247, quote, Armando Bacot is out of eligibility, but this UNC backcourt could be something special in 2024-25. RJ Davis, Seth Trimble, and Elliot Cadeau could all return, and 5-star guard Ian Jackson is primed and ready to go. UNC is making moves in the portal for a big man, and it may have to hit the wings market hard if Harrison Ingram goes pro. But if both Davis and Ingram return, look out. Davis would likely be the preseason National Player of the Year. That's wild, but it makes a ton of sense to me. And not in a way that was perhaps Carolina being overrated going into last season where they were preseason number 1, because that was based on, not a full season's body of work. This team proved it across this entire season. And so I trust this a lot more. Now, again, some of this is based on Seth coming back, because this capsule was out before we knew that Seth would not be returning. And so I wouldn't be surprised if Carolina would drop some, but not a ton, because the key ingredients here you heard was, quote, but if both Davis and Ingram return, look out. And then they're also obviously I think there's going to be some banking on what production Ian Jackson brings. And Drake Powell now is going to have to be the one to step in and be the defensive guy kind of from day one that Carolina, because I was excited about the defense that both Seth and Drake could bring together. That's kind of Drake's main identity. But now he's going to have to take the mantle of that as part of a team that, a lot of their identity as a team this year was that defense. And so the Seth news again is a blow to that. But let me go to the other side of this. Actually, the lowest one that I saw was ESPN, who has Carolina 15th. Now, what I appreciate that Jeff Borzello of ESPN has done is let's recognize that in the transfer portal era, it's nearly impossible to forecast ahead right now. But we do the best we can, because that's what off-season content is, right? And then we want to talk about it. But I appreciate that Borzello and others have specific criteria that they look at when putting these teams where they put them. So he has 3 kind of ground rules. Number 1, anybody that ESPN has in the top 60 on their draft big board, they consider gone just for this exercise. Any players not in the top 60, they consider as returners. And then players like RJ Davis, for example, whose only eligibility remaining is COVID eligibility, they project those players out and off the roster until such a time as they would declare that they're back. And so you might disagree with that, but I just appreciate that they come up with the logic. And so the reason ESPN would have Carolina lower is because based on those ground rules, neither RJ Davis or Harrison Ingram are on the roster. because Harrison is top 60 and RJ only has COVID eligibility. And then obviously ESPN and Borzello will adjust when news comes out. So if, for example, RJ says, hey, I'm coming back, they will adjust accordingly. Or if Harrison Ingram says, hey, I'm coming back, they'll adjust accordingly. And the same with anybody else around the nation. And so ESPN right now, again, with those guys out, projects the starters as Elliot Cadeau, Seth Trimble, Ian Jackson, Drake Powell, and Jalen Washington. That is not a realistic roster. If we're being honest, there's none of those guys are a 4. Jalen Washington's kind of the 4, if we're being honest. So there's no true 5. But now we know that Seth is out, so that changes that calculus as well. And so we'll see. But I do not expect that when the ball is tipped on opening night, Elliot will be a starter. Of those other 4, I don't know if any of them will, based on what I expect Carolina to bring in the transfer portal and if RJ and Harrison are back. So we'll just have to wait and see. But obviously, this is just an exercise in trying to figure out where things are at, a snapshot today. A couple other quick looks where other folks had Carolina. Field of 68 has the Tar Heels at 4, USA Today at 6, Fox at 11, and On 3, the second lowest that I saw, at 14. But all of them have a we don't know yet Carolina team inside the top 15. And I think that is a respect to Hubert Davis and a respect to Carolina as an entity. So I think that ultimately is a win. But of course, Carolina is going to have to find and retain and bring in roster parts. And then they're going to have to go do it on the court just like they did this year. All right, gang, that's it for today's episode of Locked On Tar Heels. Thanks so much for being here with us. If you're not part of the Locked On Tar Heels Discord community, come on and join us, man. We'd absolutely love to have you. The link is free and it's in the show notes. If you haven't subscribed to the show on video and audio, you can join us on any podcast platform that you can find. If you haven't hit the bell to get notifications on YouTube, you should do that, because as soon as we get breaking news about any of this roster stuff, I will go live and we will unpack it together. Gang, it's always a great day to be a Tar Heel. We'll talk again tomorrow, but until then, peace.